Join me in welcoming Sean Mahoney. Thank you.
So one thing you can tell how well companies work together is when they use a lot of the same slides in consecutive presentations. So hopefully that will help us cut down a little bit on time. When we talk about FlexPod, it is really about a couple of companies who really have a good understanding of what they want to accomplish. Very similar goals, very similar cultures, who are both disruptive in the marketplace. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what that really means and what it means to our customers and why we're successful in implementing FlexPod and FlexPod-like architectures in our customers, in our new customers, and driving where the industry overall is going. You can say we were lucky or smart a little bit about this wave of virtualization. And you see kind of the fourth wave of technology from mainframe to client services. You see it internet era, and now into virtualization. You can say which level of virtualization you're at. And everyone is at some stage of it. There was I need to buy a brand new server. My old server was running at 15% utilization. My new one's going to run at 3%. That's not very efficient. So the simple thing is I throw a bunch of simple applications on there all at the same time. Then I need to separate them out for failure domains, so I'll do them virtualized. They've been playing with this VMware stuff in the lab, and now it's mainstream. But it wasn't the technology that drove this change. It was about economics. When times are good, companies don't make fundamental changes in what they're doing. They just don't mess up the revenue stream. They don't implement new technologies until they're forced to do so because their current model is too expensive to run. And that's what we saw. We saw that perfect storm start in 2008 where the economy tanked, and it still hasn't come back. But that didn't change the requirements in IT organizations. Data still grew, compute requirements still grew. It was necessary to do things. You couldn't hire people. I had to do things in a new and different way. And that's driven the bulk of the virtualization moving forward. And the drivers for virtualization then changed the expectations. This thing called cloud came upon us. And cloud isn't a technology. It isn't necessarily a business model. It's about leveraging technology in new and different ways, driven by the retail market and retail expectations. It's completely changed where things have gone. In the mainframe era, no one had a mainframe at home. Corporate technology drove the innovation and capabilities. Today, most people come out of college and they think IT departments are dinosaurs. I do better IT at home. I just go to Apple Store every 6 months and line up around the block, like all the other lemmings. How many people have already ordered an iPhone 5? Come on, raise your hands, admit it. I got 3 requests from people on my team already. We also have a slide. This is pretty common. Every vendor has one. What are the driving factors? And the biggest change, fundamentally, is that business has a higher degree of expectations for IT. Being a cost of doing business is no longer acceptable. We have to talk in a new language, that of our consumers. The reality is we have been VARs to our consumers all along. But there's a new level of focus on the customers because now we have competition. If we don't provide it, there's some cloud provider who says they can. The business doesn't necessarily want to go there, but that's the new reality. It's a change in expectation. That's all it is. It's not about new technology. It's really about a change in expectation. It's about becoming more agile, no longer being the bottleneck to innovation. Most IT organizations are not set up about introducing new technology. They're set up to avoid risk of change. That's how they were configured. That's how they're set up. And you look at the management structures associated with it, and you see that. And the lack of communication. To Frank's point of view, I can't tell you how many customer meetings I walk into, and it's the first time people who've been working together for 5 years have actually talked. And we see it again and again. This is forcing that change. It is definitely changing. We see this all the time. The silos of technology will remain. Mainframe is still in business. It's not going anywhere. A lot of the banks here definitely use it. Manufacturing, definitely use it. But new projects, new innovation is all about agility and flexibility and elasticity. And those were never terms used to describe a mainframe environment. And that's what the cloud providers, when you looked at Amazon, 10 years ago, no one would have expected Amazon to become an IT technology company. It wasn't reality. Their biggest benefit, though, of why they became that was they did not have legacy. There was no legacy environment. They had a bunch of gear for a peak season. They had to use it. They created a business model out of it. And it's been very successful. And they proved the model. IT's challenge is they have legacy environments. So Frank threw up the slide, said 75% of your time is just keeping the lights on. The best company I ever saw was 90%. I think that slide is totally bogus. I see a lot of companies that are about 99% or higher of just keeping the lights on. But the best company I've ever seen was 90%. That's in a 40-hour work week, 4 hours doing something productive. A lot of people look at me and say, oh, that's not right. It's okay. Take your most proactive person and tell me how many hours a week they sit in weekly meetings talking about the same thing. And it happens all the time. So this is basically the FlexBuck, right? Nexus, UCS, and best of breed solutions. What's the real purpose behind this? Is to take the best capabilities of what we believe are the best architectures on the market and allow IT organizations to focus on something different. We don't want to spend the time making sure these work together or building infrastructure. We want to leverage the infrastructure. That's what this is really about. Businesses don't care about the infrastructure. They care about the applications and the data. They care about their service levels. They care that they're being met. They care about metrics associated with that and what is the value to the business. Economics say we need to improve the upfront cost structures, move from a CapEx to an OpEx type model, but then be much more aggressive about ROI and TCO. But the real impact for businesses of using this is about time to market, productivity, and revenue. That's what everyone's really interested in today. Yes, I want the budget to be less expensive. You're going to get less money this year than you got last year. Next year, it's going to happen again. But if you can take the information technology that's available today and you can leverage it in new and different ways to drive revenue, that's how you'll increase spending in IT. And it has to happen. But to do that, you have to show value and you have to change the model. And it's not about building the infrastructure, it's all about leveraging the infrastructure. Technology for the last 40 years has been about moving the complexity further up the stack. Always. We have a great working relationship. We work together. We have massive labs, millions of dollars of equipment. Leverage our ability to put together and use it for new and different ways. But we can't do it in a rigid fashion. We can't walk in and say, this is the cabinet of gear you have to buy. So we didn't. You can buy these separately. You can put them together yourself. You can do a self-certification against our support matrices. There's no rigid requirement that you have to buy a specific pod or block of architecture. It's a tremendously flexible capability. But the key to it is guidance. We can give you all the pieces, but we're going to give you the guidance on how to successfully deploy it, not just from an infrastructure perspective, but to extend that out into the application space. The less time you spend figuring out how to get these things to work together and to load up the application, the more time to spend leveraging those applications for the business, the final tuning that your business needs to be successful. The biggest advantage for an IT organization is you know your business better than any cloud provider. You know where are the areas you want to spend the largest portion of your time. So a lot of people are saying, well, I need to slow down. I can't do this. I need to focus on the stuff that I've got. I need to focus on my legacy environments. The challenge with that is those problems are not going away. They're getting worse. The longer it takes to move to a faster infrastructure, a more dynamic infrastructure, greater agility, the project list just keeps getting longer. And the unfortunate part is your consumers know that that list is getting longer. You all have a list of projects that you are focused on, and there's a list of projects you know you're never going to get to this year. And your consumers know about that list. When we look at the directions that this is going into, is a lot of people start out in test and dev. So the question was asked earlier is, where do you start? How do you make this happen faster? And it's not about, let me try it out in test and dev anymore. That's too slow. The reality is you pick projects that are isolated, that have a high degree of success if there's the correct focus, that can be marketed internally of their success. And success breeds success. Whether it's VDI, which is certainly a new disruptive technology, how do I use that? How do I drive toward that? Biggest driver for VDI for a lot of things is mobile devices. People want portals. They don't want their IT organization certifying new project or new device. They want to go to a third party as an interface, and they want to control that desktop experience. But that's disruptive. It's not a traditional model. Leveraging virtual server environments more in their environment is certainly a high-pressure task. But also one thing that IT organizations don't do enough of is push things out into the cloud. They see it too much as a competitor. But if you look at your project list, there are probably quite a few of them that don't drive revenue for the company. Find them, push them out to the cloud. Be seen doing it, because that gives you more time to focus on revenue driving capabilities of projects. The scaling factor, this is a big comment. You know, a lot of people talk about big data. What is it? Well, we've had big data for years, but it's becoming a more problematic issue across the entire environment. It used to be individual cases, particular areas. And I remember the first time I was handling a file server and I had to manually delete MP3 files with back waves. Nowadays, it's all kinds of personal information. You're no longer allowed to delete it. It's just on there forever. And it's cheaper to throw hardware at the problem, historically. I'm coming from a storage company, so take that with a grain of salt. But there's a reality, is data's growing faster than we can keep up with it. And it's continuing to do so. And managing that information is a new problem, because we can't throw people and resources at it. Management has to change completely. Object-based management, managing an individual server, a volume, a LUN, a port, is no longer practical. It has to be policy-driven. It has to be something that can be repeatable. And also, it's a talent issue. I remember when I first started at Citi, and we were swapping out Symmetrix for another Symmetrix or DMX on a weekly basis. I said, well, you need to go to 2. He said, we don't have enough people. It wasn't the data copy, it was the outages. How many servers needed to be touched? How many configurations needed to be handled? What level of person needed to do that work? That was the bottleneck. Today, it's the entire IT organization that's viewed as that bottleneck. The pace of change. And the other factor is when we look at technology change. Today, without virtualization, refreshes are completely driven by the application environments. When do I upgrade SAP or Oracle or Exchange is driving the change in the infrastructure. Virtualization allows you to start changing the infrastructure out when things get released. Intel delivers on the tick-tock model. That's driven the entire industry on the infrastructure side is what their refresh model is. That's not tied to when the software is changing. So we can refresh the infrastructure using virtualization at a different schedule than the application environments. That changes a lot of different things. It creates a tremendous amount of flexibility to get a better return on the investment for the IT organizations. Build this out. So one thing is always about cost. It's got to be cheaper. But the most valuable commodity there is time, because you can't get it back. I don't care who you are, how much money you have, you can't buy back time. Once a project starts, it's all about when it finishes. When the ROI starts is when I'm actually using the infrastructure and the applications and the data. So we look at this as the design factor is to take this out and really focus on what is the service level to your customer. That's the design angle. What is the service level that your customer needs to know about? What are the metrics associated? What are the value of those metrics? Concentrate on that. The infrastructure needs to have the flexibility and capability to support multiple service levels. How many service levels do you have? Enough to eliminate the impact of exceptions, and then I usually add 2. One at the very high end, one at the very low end. The low end one is, yeah, I could do the same thing as buying 2 drives at Best Buy with a RAID controller, but here's what you don't have. Or at the high end is, yes, I could do that, but it's going to take a couple extra months and the different approval committees, because IT always has to say yes. You always have to be in a position to say, I can absolutely do that, I can provide a value to you. When we look at the impact, though, of taking a step beyond the technology, we know what's in the Nexus switch, we know what's in the UCS server, we know what's in the NetApp system. Fundamentally, though, you can take that flexibility, but you really have to translate that into something that's a best practice. How do I deploy it successfully? I can give you a million options, but if I don't give you the right path to take through those options to actually deploy something successfully, I'm not helping you. So the biggest benefit about this is not that we got together and created a great support organization or lab, it's when we got together and said, okay, for a particular application, we're going to tell you how to actually set this up, to build the proper service level for a particular application. And it's not just for the production environment. We're going to do that for production, we're going to do that for your DR site, we're going to do that for your test, dev, QA, we're going to do that for the archive components of the infrastructure and service for a particular application. Because that's what the consumer wants. consumer doesn't come in and say, I need a 4 terabyte one. I have an Oracle instance, I have a SQL Server instance, Exchange deployment to me. That's the service I want to deploy. I don't want to sit here and go and request again and again the different components of that service level. I want the whole thing. And that's what we extended these, is not just how you configure an application in this environment, but how you configure the entire service. And that does tie into the management stack. It ties into a lot of different areas. When we look at the solution impact on this, it is changing the game. It is away from the siloed approach to a particular project. And it's not that people are going to say, I need to focus on the entire solution. I need to know every single piece of it. But there's an awareness factor that's traditionally not there. Most siloed IT organizations are very tunnel vision, that I know my area and then I hand it off and I'm done. For this solution, there's an investment. There is an awareness. There is a team function of putting this together and making it work. But manageability is the true key to having this work. And it's not just that we provide a great enterprise toolkit for our storage. Cisco does that for the UCS and also for the networking portion. It is about creating solutions that see this from a heterogeneous perspective. Because in these types of environments, there's a lot more complexity. When something goes wrong, it doesn't just stop working. It gets slow. We've all seen that. Is someone calls up and says, my environment's slow, fix it. Didn't stop working, and don't take me down. I can't incur an outage, just make it faster again. So you have to go into this environment and understand that there are lots of problems, but what's the root cause? What's causing the problem? Who's the bully and who are the victims, and what's the impact of fixing these types of environments? So not only did we sit here and say, okay, how do we make this stuff work together, but we also had to come up with a capability of fixing problems, understanding where they were, and communicating effectively to who was responsible. NetApp acquired a company called Corey, produced a product called Balance. And this basically goes in and does root cause analysis of what's going on in the environment. And this works with the individual enterprise management tools for the components of the stack. But this gives you a single pane of glass view of everything going on in the environment. Doesn't matter whether it's memory, CPU, network, storage. It tells you who's the bully, who are the victims. It also tells you proactively, if I fix one bottleneck, where's the next one going to appear? This is something that was necessary for a complex infrastructure to improve agility and operational capabilities. Frank was right on. Operations are the biggest challenge. It's not the technology. Management tools that already existed were usually better than what was being deployed because most of it sat on a shelf. But when you start building complex infrastructures, you need tools that really do see the entire picture and can solve problems very quickly and can prevent problems. It has to be a change toward proactive management. Capacity, trend analysis.
So you mean to tell me you're going to see my application running on a guest machine, understand the performance of the OS, understand what's happening in the virtual layer, take a look at the actual server, go through the HBAs, tell me what's happening on the storage, and give me a view of all these components and tell me what the problem is across multiple devices, Cisco, NetApp, and a server from, I guess, UCS.
So we have this set up and certified for UCS and the FlexPod with NetApp. This is also a heterogeneous product, so it does work with other server manufacturers and other storage companies. As far as the application within the actual operating system, we see it based from a service level perspective. So a installation of a virtual machine is to a particular service level, which describes what its expectations are for performance.
How do you measure the performance is the question?
We monitor the server, we monitor the network, and we monitor the storage system. Those are all brought into a single pane of glass. And the view is of the system. These are actually some screenshots of what some dives into this. But it does show you the ability to dive into what's going on in the overall environment. It's focused on virtualization, specifically built initially for the VMware environments. And it's expanding out to Hyper-V, Xen, KVM, etc. But the focus here is we had to provide a capability for customers to say if they bought a FlexPod, they had to manage a FlexPod, not the individual components of it. This does that for the entire stack.
But is the network component there?
Yes.
So I will see the switch.
You'll see everything from I/O going from a virtual machine all the way down to the underlying storage component.
It seems
want to see that it assists my network components as well with the performance.
Yeah, the idea is to look at where are bottlenecks. You know, when you set up services, there are certain performance expectations: latency, memory consumption, I/O going on with the CPUs, the servers. When something starts to slow down.
But how do you know when it's slowing down? When you set a threshold?
Yes.
Who sets the threshold?
Whoever sets up the initial service levels, right? So you determine the service level. And the service levels determine, you know, what is the overall workload. I can say is on a particular server, if the overall CPU utilization of the entire box is over 80%, I just want to know about it. And then I'll go deeper into it. On a particular virtual machine, it should always be able to have a particular sustained throughput, I/O, latency to, and from that machine should never be above a certain point. Those are all settings you can create as part of the service levels.
Now, do you go to, when you say the performance, do you go to identify, say, which application were causing problem or
You'd be able to identify the individual virtual machine, not necessarily applications within that virtual machine. But you'd be able to identify is which particular virtual machine is the bully causing a problem on a particular system or environment.
Yeah, but without to the application level, you know, assume say no application, we need a network. Now, I don't need network. So network will never have a problem. So how you can say, yeah, this virtual machine causing problem, but it's not like a 24/7 causing problem, it's under certain incidents.
That was highlighted. So I'm happy to go in this afterwards, offline, grab me, and we'll sit down and go through this in a lot of detail.
Okay.
So we look at some of the values associated with this was also not only to create tools, just managing those components or balance, but also to create an open framework. This is a critical aspect when we look at the environments. It can't be proprietary. You guys have built a lot of tools. There are a lot of other tools out there. Cisco will probably buy a lot more tools. We might buy a couple. But the overall infrastructure, there's a lot of different tool sets that are out there. A lot of it's legacy. A lot of it's from other portions of the environment that they just don't want to go to a brand new tool. They want to use it out there. And then there's another layer that's been added, this concept of orchestration. This isn't something that's really heavily been used in IT historically. This is relatively new. It's the wild, wild west. There are a lot of products out there. Frank talked about a couple products that Cisco's bought. But there is this capability, and this is focusing on provision. This is not about managing the environment. This isn't about configuring the environment. It's about provisioning. The enterprise tools and workflows that are already there for Cisco and NetApp will do the lower level configuration details when a provisioning request is made. There are automated workflow tools to create that for each service level. The orchestration tools will call them and engage them and leverage them. And there are different types and for different use cases. What's best for a VDI environment is very often different than a virtual server environment. If your portal is for your help desk, it would be a very different look and feel than if you were doing end user self-provisioning. So there are a lot of different tools. A lot of the enterprises I work with have multiple orchestration tools for different portions of the environment. There's still a lot, there's overlap, but there's no one tool that does everything perfectly yet. They're trying, there are a number of them out there. And being able to do more of an open architecture allows our customers to use whatever they're comfortable with. Whether it's something that Cisco already has, whether it's what's in VMware, or Microsoft, or looking at different products from Cloudflare, or Gale, or CA, or a dozen other companies that are out there today. That was key for us is to make sure we had an open architecture, an open API that these companies could use. But they also did a lot of things internally that were common. There are different levels of QoS within our product that matches up with what's in UCS and what's out in the network, in the Nexus layer. That was very important for us to make sure we combine those capabilities and standardize across the board, and then extend it out into the hypervisor space so that they built also a common model for QoS. So when we look at the real impact on this next, where we went with this, was not only did we go and build a common architecture for how to deploy infrastructure, but it was about extending that out into the application space. So we've done a lot of work on validated designs for different application environments that customers can use. And these are flexible documents. This isn't a rigid configuration that you have to do it a particular way. It's about really providing guidance to do it so it works right the first time. And that way, these are living documents because we are going to make changes. We're going to come out with new products. We're going to come out with new features. We're going to work together to certify that. But we need to be able to have it so that customers can consume those new capabilities easily into their environments. So a good portion of a lot of these documents is not just on what is the validated architecture, but how to get there from a prior version. What's the upgrade process? How do I get from where I am today to where I want to be tomorrow? And that is often the biggest challenge. Something that we also did was a cooperative service and support agreement. So we get this question a lot is, something goes wrong, who do I call? My answer is, whoever you're most comfortable calling first. Because whether you want to call Cisco or you want to call NetApp, we'll answer the phone and we'll stay on the phone until the problem gets fixed. We built the cooperative support lab down in RTP, North Carolina, to mimic any customer situation. And for all of our qualification and testing for all of our products and services right now are done against a FlexPod install. So our entire QA process now for data on tap, our operating system, all our features and functions, all our software components for all application integration are all tested and validated against the FlexPod architecture from day one. That was a big shift for our QA process. Had to get done, we did it. And our RTP facility right now, I think was number one, it's now number two for largest install of the UCS platform in the world. It's about 800 chassis, not too many systems, small number. But we do see customers who are looking for that level of interaction, integration as companies. And we have very close working relationship. Our cultures are very similar, and we're located right across the street from each other down there. We'll look at this, at what this means for customers. We don't care who you call first, we're staying on the phone together. This is a critical aspect for us to make this successful. Because throwing the technology together is nice, but it has to be supported. It has to be something where a customer can have the confidence of calling up and their question is going to get answered and no one's going to be pointing fingers. No one's going to say, I'm not responsible for that. That's an investment we made, and that's really an understanding of what the customers want and the customers need. If we didn't do this, we would not be as successful with this as we've been. And this is really about making this a positive experience for customers. Because, quite frankly, Cisco, UCS, it's not been on the market a whole long time. We've been very disruptive in a lot of areas with a lot of growth over the last few years with a large number of new customers. And that first customer experience with it, when they call service and support, is critical that it happens the right way. And we're not walking away from that responsibility. We've also extended that into the hypervisor space with VMware, and we will also be doing that with a number of the other hypervisor vendors that had to add to this. So when we look at FlexPod, it's FlexPod for VMware. And we've extended that out into other spaces and certainly out into the application space as well. But it is an aspect to make sure that the solution works and that it will work moving forward. A couple of use cases. These are all validated architectures that we've deployed with large customers that have actual architectural blueprints, best practice guides, deployment models, the guides to deploy these successful in the spaces, not just individually, but also in combination. A lot of the mid-sized businesses just won't deploy SharePoint, they'll deploy SharePoint and a SQL environment and Exchange and file services on one pod. That all has to work together. So we had to build tools that would accommodate those different workloads to successfully deploy them in these types of environments. We didn't build a sizer just for one app, it had to incorporate a number of different applications appropriately. And then we made a couple other changes for how do you buy one of these? How's it configured, what the sizing is? And for us, it doesn't particularly matter whether you want something small, something medium, or something large. The capabilities are exactly the same. All the protocols are supported on all the different platforms across the board, and they can scale in different directions. You can start with a smaller system, incorporate it into a larger system, and then incorporate that into an even larger system at another point in time. Same features, same functionality, no sacrifice. That if I want a particular capability, I don't have to buy the largest system to get a particular feature. They exist in all three. And I can scale in any direction from these systems. I can add more compute, or more network, or more storage. This is the most recent model that was released. This was built off a very low-end platform, just to give you an idea. There's no change in the capabilities of this platform than from our largest FlexPod architecture. No changes. All the protocols are supported. All the capabilities and functionality with the storage system extending all the way through the stack. So you can go to a smaller version of a FlexPod and not sacrifice features or function. And then a lot of work recently has been into this concept of multiple applications in the same environment. and the different workloads and characteristics. To get to your point of how do you define what's wrong, when something is wrong, how does that tie into it? It is based on different service levels that you'll be running in the environment. And they are tied toward different applications, but this is also not just different applications. We also had a couple things, get to the slide in a minute, around secure multi-tenancy, which is a key aspect of this, especially driven by the service provider market. When we look at the initial aspect of this, we want to be able to scale out towards larger systems over time. A lot of it has to do with customers aren't sure which direction they're going to go into. So there has to be a lot of flexibility in these architectures. What service level is going to be consumed faster than another? Going into it, you kind of have an idea of what you hope will be consumed, but the reality is that changes over time very, very quickly. And with different projects coming on board, you're never sure which direction you need to go into. Could be faster storage controllers, faster disk, or it could be denser disk and lower speed. And we start looking at incorporating differences between production, DR, QA, test, dev. That also changes what's going on in these particular solutions. Obviously, VMware is the main driver for these types of environments today. It's about 80–85% of the enterprise market for virtualization. This is certainly the initial target for us. When we looked at a lot of this was about how do we make these environments work better at scale. That's been a big, big challenge. And then incorporate new capabilities that were not necessarily part of the initial rollout, especially around recovery and backup and replication. We're not tied into a lot of the initial designs. And then today, the big driver we see more and more are about mobile devices. People want a portal into the infrastructure from somewhere. And this needs to be rapidly provisioned. It's finally showing a positive price model for VDI infrastructures. And we want to see that extend out. But there's a lot of pressure here is really around time to market. How do I roll these out very quickly, roll them back? Right now, a lot of IT organizations under pressure is what is your Windows strategy next year for the desktop? I'd be less worried about the desktop and much more worried about everybody out there accessing the applications directly. And you can see that even in Windows 8 and the pressure they had to make that a mobile operating system. In fact, trying out Windows 8 on a traditional desktop is a painful experience if you're not used to touching the screen. But one thing we also looked at was how do we do this in a cost-effective manner? VDI sessions, if you just look at it one-off, are often more expensive than just buying a regular desktop. It's at scale where you start to see the major changes. How do I deploy applications faster? How do I do things in a much more dynamic fashion of rolling things out and pulling them back? Test dev environments, QA environments. How do I get things out for disaster recovery? But the mobile device users are definitely the area where we see the most pressure. Some things here in New York that are very unique to this environment are trading floors. Trading floors are a great use case for VDI deployments. Traditional model is there's one system under the desk, it's connected to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 monitors. You can always tell who the most important guy is on a trading floor. This is the guy who has the most screens. But the problem is when that one box goes down, all those screens go down. And that person gets really angry. The VDI environment, think about it as each screen is its own VDI session. I can separate out market data from core apps and trading applications and the internet access. Shake your head no, but it actually does work. Kind of interesting. So end user computing is certainly an area of very high growth. It's an area where we're starting to see a lot of success in this particular area, mostly because it is a non-legacy environment. When you start looking at how people are using these types of things, it's not the traditional, I just need VPN access. It's not enough anymore. Because there's no guarantee that I'm going to be on my regular corporate device. This is something, though, that really sets us apart in this particular area. It's called secure multi-tenancy. So when we look at FlexPod, FlexPod is an infrastructure model. Secure multi-tenancy is really about a deployment model to separate out workloads. So the service providers had a big challenge in that they had to have a shared infrastructure model. How do they separate it out, though, for role-based access controls for different customers and consumers to guarantee they could not see their data? So this is an architecture that was put together with VMware specifically that was for complete isolation of workloads for role-based access controls from the storage through the network, through the server, through the hypervisor, all the way out into the individual virtual machines. The NSA actually helped with some of the core requirements for the security aspect. I'm pretty sure they didn't sneak any backdoors into it. But we'll see. But this allows for customers to have a lot of confidence of a shared infrastructure, not just for role-based access controls, but also for security associated with protocol access. We can separate this out for different workload environments, different levels of QoS, different service levels. So this could be different consumers, different business units, different access protocols, or different SLAs. This also provides a mechanism of moving workloads in their entirety from one physical infrastructure to another. So instead of thinking of it from a very granular vMotion on an individual virtual machine, we will move the entire silo of infrastructure and its data from one physical infrastructure to another. For several protocols, that can be done completely non-disrupted. And that's the new methodology for data migration moving forward. Our next iteration of FlexPod will actually be built on the new cluster mode version of Data ONTAP, which will allow us to do that on all protocols. So we'll be expanding that out, and that is the investment. So our gearing right now within our product development is what this looks like for an individual FlexPod today is changing completely moving forward. It has to be released in about 30 days or so. The delay actually is to also be on GA code. So one last thing I want to comment on. When we talk about FlexPod and the release schedule, FlexPod and FlexPod architectures are not built on future releases. The current release of a FlexPod is built on GA shipping code throughout the entire stack. No futures, no beta code. It's what's been shipping and has gone GA. And we update that about a monthly basis for patches, and then we reiterate the overall FlexPod launch is about every 6 months to a year. So we're on the second release of FlexPod. The third release of the FlexPod will be coming out about less than 2 months out. So I'll end with, the major focus here again, we wanted to provide an infrastructure that tremendous flexibility for our customers with the guidance to deploy it successfully and to be able to go deep into the application spaces so that you had the best practices to deploy successfully, to change the focus and the time on leveraging the infrastructure and technology, not having to build it. Any questions? We've got about a minute or two.
Yeah, we got a minute or two, or actually maybe we could have some questions during the networking the time later. We just want to make sure that we take advantage of the weather before it gets nasty out, so that we can make sure that we can get up on and see the space shuttle and things like that. So Sean, thank you very much.